Tonight we're going to be reading There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins, and The Lord of the Rings by Frodo Baggins. These were meant as real stories that were released in England before the books. It still says in Wikipedia that it was written by Bilbo Baggins, which is incredibly charming. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll just get started. So a big deep breath, and I'm going to tuck you in. There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins, and The Lord of the Rings by Frodo Baggins. Concerning hobbits. Hobbits have been living and farming in the four farthings of the Shire for many hundreds of years, quite content to ignore and be ignored by the world of the big folk. Middle-earth being, after all, full of strange creatures beyond count, hobbits must seem of little importance, being neither renowned as great warriors, nor counted among the very wise. Hobbits' only real passion is for food, a rather unfair observation, as we also have developed a keen interest in brewing of ales and the smoking of pipeweed. But where our hearts truly lie is in peace and quiet, and good tilled earth. For all hobbits share love of things that grow, and yes, no doubt to others, our ways seem quaint. But today of all days, it is brought home to me, it is no bad thing to celebrate a simple life. How can I begin the telling of this unbelievable and strange adventure? It was a lovely spring morning, April 25th, when who should turn up but Gandalf? It had been a lovely day. The sun was shining and the grass was very green. I recollect seeing an old man with a staff, a tall-pointed blue hat, long gray cloak, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said I, but the man looked at me from under long, bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning, or that it is morning to be good on?" "All of them at once," said I, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors." "If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry. We have all the day before us." Then I sat down in a seat by my door, crossed my legs, and blew out a beautiful gray ring of smoke that sailed into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf. "But I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I am arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone. We are plain quiet folk in the Shire and have no use of adventures, nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner." The next day, April 26th, who do you suppose should churn up on my doorstep but a dwarf with a blue beard tucked under a gold belt and very bright eyes under his dark green hood? "Dwalin, at your service," he said with a low bow. But Dwalin was only the first. I had hardly 3 pieces of cake when the bell rang again. "Dwalin at your service," the next dwarf said with his hand on his breast. Not long after the next ringing of the bell brought into my home Keely and Feely, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In the course of a few snacks, I had made a guest of an unknown dwarf, and a second, soon 3, then 4, and more, until there were 12. Then at last Gandalf arrived, with Thorin, the chief of the dwarves. They all wanted copious amounts of food. The pantry began to look very bare. And drink. Any finest ale seemed to be the favorite. It turned into quite an unexpected party. Then, all of the dwarves sang and made music, and Thorin and Gandalf also sing of kings and elves, this and that, late into the night, into far-off lands, and gold and treasure and adventure. The dwarves were preparing to sit and tell of their journey to Mirkwood, their crossing over, the mountain from Smaug, the red dragon who guards the golden harps, goblets, and jewels. Then I discovered Gandalf wanted me to join them in the quest, the 14th member of this expedition. Gandalf took no discussion on the matter. It was go. After the announcement, Gandalf took out an old worn map, a plan of the mountain we were to head to. Thorin claimed to know the route perfectly, calling the map useless. Gandalf, however, pointed out a secret door that was marked by a special rune, and Gandalf had the key to this special door. Smaug, the dragon, was brought to this mountain by the gold collected by Thorin's grandfather. This wicked worm fell upon the town of Dale, destroying most of the warriors. He crept into the mountain through the front gate and routed all of the dwarves, keeping the wealth for himself. When I heard this tale, I soon realized they meant for me to help them steal back this treasure. Thorin's father was nearly killed in the same quest, only to be found later in the dungeons of the necromancer. The next morning, I found myself all alone until Gandalf walked in unannounced, asking me where I has got to. I was then told that I was to meet the dwarves at the Green Dragon Inn by the water, exactly at 11 o'clock. He pushed me hard out of the door, without a hat, a walking stick, any money, nor pocket handkerchief. I made it to the Green Dragon by 11 o'clock, just, and the dwarves were all packed and ready to go. Then, that night we saw 3 trolls about a fire. Sent to investigate, I decided to attempt a pocket picking. I was soon caught out, and that led to an argument between the trolls as to whether or not to eat me. And in the scuffle, I began to escape, but soon the dwarves arrived, and in a new fight began. The trolls grabbed a sack and captured the dwarves, one by one. A fresh argument began when the trolls began to hear each other's voices bickering. They forgot about the dawn, which turns trolls to stone. What had kept them arguing until light was the voice of Gandalf. After freeing all of the dwarves, they began to search for the trolls' cave, in which Gandalf thought they hid during the day. They followed the marks of the trolls straight to a huge stone door in the side of the hill, but it couldn't be moved. Then I remembered the key that I had found on the ground when the trolls had fought. Quickly, Gandalf took the key, put it in the keyhole, turned it, and the door swung open. We all went inside, where we discovered the trolls' plunder. Gold, coins, weapons, clothes, even bones of victims, as well as some food and even some ale. We had a fine breakfast. Just what a Hobbit needs, and I cheered up immensely. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of the beautiful swords, and I took a knife in a leather. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as a short sword for me. We buried the pots of gold nearby, and the dwarves cast many spells upon them. Then, once we were on our way, "Where did you go to, if I may ask?" Thorin asked Gandalf. "Oh, to look ahead," said he. "And what brought you back in the nick of time?" "Looking behind," replied Gandalf. So, on we rode, slowly climbing into the steeper country, and now we could see mountains ahead, with snow-tipped peaks. I had never seen anything so huge and awesome in my whole life. "Is that the mountain?" I asked Balin. But he explained that this is only the beginning of the Misty Mountains, a huge range on the edge of the Winterland, and after crossing them, there would be many miles more to travel before reaching Erebor, the lonely mountain. I began once again to wish for my cozy chair and my comfortable hobbit hole. Gandalf explained that he was searching for the path to the last homely house hidden in a secret valley called Rivendell. At last, Gandalf found the path, leading down a steep, slippery slope into a beautiful, hidden ravine. The journey down was quite frightening, but the valley was wonderful, with beech and dark trees and a singing river, which all added to a comfortable feeling in the twilight. We soon heard the elves, a burst of song like laughter in the trees. We were then shown the way to a very tricky bridge, narrow and without a parapet, that at last brought us to the last homely house. The master of the house was an elf friend, one of those people whose fathers came into the strange stories before the beginning of history. The wars of the evil goblins and the elves and the first men in the north. In those days of our tale, there were still some people who had both elves and heroes of the north for ancestors, and Elrond, the master of the house, was their chief. He was noble and fair in face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as kings of dwarves, and kind as summer. That day, he looked at the swords they discovered in the troll's lair, and he said, "This, Thorin, the rune's name Orcrist, Goblin Cleaver, in the ancient tongue of Gondolin. It was a famous blade. This, Gandalf, is Glamdring, Foehammer, that the king of Gondolin once wore. Keep them well." Then Elrond looked at Thorin's map for a long while. A crescent moon of Midsummer's Eve was shining, and Elrond held up the map in the moonlight, and then these runes appeared on it. "These are moon letters," said Elrond. "They can only be seen when the moon shines behind them, and what is more, with the more cunning sort, it must be a moon of the same shape and season as the day when it was written. The dwarves invented them and wrote them in silver pens. And as friends could tell you, these must have been written on a midsummer's eve in a crescent moon, long ago." Then Gandalf and Thorin both asked the question that we had all been thinking. What do they say? Both of it vexed at that Elrond had discovered these first. "Stand by the greystone when the thrush knocks," read Elrond, "and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole." Thorin explained that Lupin was the father of the fathers of the eldest race of dwarves, and that Durin's day is the first day of the last moon of the autumn of the threshold of winter. The next morning was a midsummer's eve morning, and as fresh as could be dreamed. Blue sky, and never a cloud, and the sun dancing on the water. Long days after we had climbed out of the valley and left the last homely house miles behind, we were still going up and up and up. It was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely long road with an immense thunderstorms to boot. Fili and Kili found a dry cave, and I soon fell asleep. But when I awoke, I was just in time to see the last of the pony's tails disappearing into a crack in the cave wall. Out jumped goblins, big goblins, great ugly-looking goblins, lots of goblins. Before you could say rocks and blocks, they grabbed us and carried us off. But they could not capture Gandalf. The crack quickly closed, and Gandalf was on the wrong side of it. We stumbled into a big cavern, lit by a great fire in the middle and full of goblins. There in the shadows, on a large flat stone, sat a tremendous goblin with a huge head, and armed goblins were standing around him carrying the axes and bent swords that they use. "Murderers and elf friends," the great goblin shouted. "Slash them, beat them, bite them, gnash them, take them away to the dark holes full of snakes, and never let them see the light again." He was in such a rage that he jumped off his seat and himself rushed at Thorin with his mouth wide open. Just at that moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire went poof into a tower of blue glowing smoke right up to the roof. Scattered, piercing white sparks all among the goblins. Gandalf had come to save us. We made a run for it, and at this point, Gandalf fell behind, and Thorin with him. They turned. Draw your sword, Thorin! But just then, quite suddenly, I felt the thump of a hard rock on my head and remembered nothing more. That's the end of our first chapter of the Red Book by J.R.R. Tolkien. Thank you for joining us tonight, and remember to like and subscribe. Members only starts at $1.99, and I'm going to be doing the rest of this book, and it looks as though there are many, many more chapters to go. Thank you so much for listening. Sleep tight.